be more confident. It's going to be fine. Don't get so worked up and stressed about stuff. Just go for it, give it a go. Try things, fail, amend your plan, and just give it a go. I mean, if you never try, you'll never know.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Path Found, the podcast about the real, messy, unexpected journeys that lead us to the work we love. I'm Monica Argandonia, and every week I talk with someone whose story proves there's no single right way to build a meaningful life. Today, we're traveling all the way to South Africa to talk with Sean Walpole. Sean has started and failed at more ventures than most people ever attempt, and he wouldn't change a thing. From Zimbabwe to Cape Town, from IT startups to scuba diving to international education, Sean's story is about what happens when you stop waiting for the right moment and just go. Today on Path Found, we're talking entrepreneurship, international experience, and what it means to find your path by walking it. Let's dig in. Sean, thank you so much for being here and being part of this project today. Can you start by just telling us a little bit about yourself, where you come from?
Monica, thank you very much. I'm really flattered that you asked me to be part of this project. I listened to your first couple of episodes and amazing. So yeah, thank you very much for having me here. Where do I come from? So that is a great question. I was born in Salisbury in Rhodesia, which very shortly afterwards became Zimbabwe. I was born in 1979 and Zimbabwe was formed in 1980. But my family prior to that actually came from Ireland. So my grandparents were born in Dublin, and after World War II, they left looking for better prospects. And they had three options: the United States, Australia, or Africa. And they got a job with Unilever, who were setting up and expanding into Africa. And they left on a ship, but they had to take they left Dublin and they went to Southampton for the ship. And my dad was born in London along the way. So the reason I'm telling you all of this is I've ended up with a British passport and an Irish passport, which have been very, very helpful in my international travels. My mum's side of the family came from South Africa, though. So I was also able to, by birth, get a South African passport. So I've ended up, having been born in Zimbabwe, I've ended up living in Cape Town, South Africa, but also have European citizenship, British citizenship, and South African. So, and I could be Zimbabwean again if I wanted to, but for now, Zimbabwe's not as exciting as the city of Cape Town.
Okay, that's amazing. 3 passports. I'm a little jealous. So what was it like growing up in Zimbabwe? What was school like?
Yeah, so I grew up in Harare, Zimbabwe, and I had a pretty amazing childhood. My dad worked for a company that did telephone exchanges. My mum she stopped working after we were born. I've got 2 other brothers, so 3 boys, and she decided to devote her time to bringing us up, which we're truly grateful for. At the time, though, we used to give her trouble and where she'd go to work so we could get up to mischief because she was at home. I'm sure we didn't get to do as much of that as we wanted to. I went to school in Harare. Something as well that you look back on when you get older is what an incredible education system the Zimbabwean had. I went to a school called St. George's College, and we were given a really first-class education. We did O-levels and then A-levels, which are part of the Cambridge exam system. And I mean, the professors who taught us at school were all very, very well educated themselves, all from overseas educations. We had a wonderful education. What I will say, though, is the Catholic school system in Zimbabwe was pretty strict. So back then, we still had corporal punishments. The school was 100 years old. So there were all these traditions and rules and unusual things that we had to watch out for. There were certain patches of lawn that you couldn't walk on unless you were a prefect. Those kinds of things. We regularly used to get beaten as well as a form of punishment. It was either beating or manual labor, depending on the severity of your crimes. So I graduated high school in 1997. Yeah. I got beaten on my last day of school for having a cigarette in the toilets at school, which obviously we weren't supposed to do. I was pretty upset that it was the last day of school, but yeah. Yeah, I'd say education was first class, but I would definitely call it an exercise in survival. We became very, very good at surviving at school. I'm still part of a WhatsApp group with my graduating class from high school. There were about 100 of us, and I think 60 of us are still on the WhatsApp group. So, and people post to each other every day. Maybe it was a shared trauma, but we do look back fondly on our days at school.
What happens after high school? Do you go straight to college?
Zimbabwe is an interesting place. There was only one main university in Harare, and the competition to get into that university was very, very, very stiff. You basically needed to have 4 A's at A level, which is very, very difficult to achieve. I was lucky enough that my parents had both gone to Rhodes University in Grahamstown, and it was their hope that I was going to do the same thing. And I did pretty well in my A levels and was able to get in quite easily to Grahamstown. So in 1998 was my first year at university. My parents dropped me off in Grahamstown, and that was when I really started growing up. It was quite a big shock to have departed a city to live in a small town college campus. There were only 4,000 students on campus back then. So yeah, I went from quite a big world with a lot of freedom to quite a small world without a lot of freedom. I got my driver's license when I was 17. So I'd been driving in Zimbabwe for 2 years. I had a lot of independence back then. So going to university, I didn't have that independence anymore. Living in a small town, I found very challenging.
Did you know what you wanted to study or what kind of job you wanted? What were you interested in?
Okay, so I didn't really know what I wanted to do. My parents were I actually wanted to take a gap year, but the political situation in Zimbabwe at the time was very difficult. My parents were very concerned that if I didn't get straight into the university system, at some point they may run out of money and not be able to send me to university anymore. So they strongly encouraged me not to take a gap year and to go to university. And I wasn't as appreciative of it as I should have been. So I went to university and I signed up and enrolled for a Bachelor of Commerce with the idea to get my BCom. But what happened in the first year in South Africa is very, very easy, particularly if you've studied A-levels in Zimbabwe. So I was able to not do a lot of work and still pass everything. So my first year, I did quite a lot of partying, but I didn't build any of those good study habits. And the wheels came off for me very quickly in my second year at college. Because all of a sudden, I did have to do some work. I ended up failing university in the middle and having to go back home, which was a pretty big inflection point in my life.
How did you handle it when you came home?
So the South African system, you have to declare early, and pretty much all the degrees are very well laid out. So you in first year, you know what you're going to major in, and then all your courses for the next 2 to 3 years are entirely structured for you. There are very few electives. So it's like a course syllabus that you have to follow. So what ended up in my case was I failed statistics in my first year, and then I did it again in the middle of my second year, and that was it. I was out. So I decided at that point with my parents that it would be better that I take a gap. And that was when I took a gap out of college. So something I would say to anyone who is not sure if they're ready yet for a college experience, rather take the gap year before, really know that you want to go to college and really know that you want to study before you actually take that plunge. Because I just took the plunge, and then I had to do a lot of growing up when I took responsibility for dropping out. So I was in Grahamstown. I had spent the first 6 months it must have been 1999 in Grahamstown, failing at university. I then came back home. I spent a month deciding how I was going to tell my parents the bad news. And unfortunately, the university did it for me. They sent a letter to my mom and dad. I remember getting this phone call from my mom saying, "Come home right now." She was very unimpressed with me, and rightly so. But yeah, then the secret was out. And I think for the first month, I was really sorry for myself. But I then got together with a friend of mine who hadn't gone to college and was living in Harare. We decided to found an IT company. So we rented a small office and we started fixing people's computers. Something that I'd become very good at, because when I was at university, we had set up something called Res. I was part of the original network that we set up in our Res so that we could play computer games. But I'd done so much trial and error on networking that I'd become pretty adept at that. So I used those skills to start the IT company, and we did really well. We started out just with our office, and And within 3 or 4 months, when I look back at it, it's crazy. Like 6 months, I then had evolved to the point that I decided I wanted to go to England, and I sold my shares in the computer company to my partner, JP. And I did pretty well out of selling those shares. I made some money. I got some savings. And I bought a brand new computer. That was pretty cool. So our IT company period was pretty quick. I then went with another one of my best friends to London because I had this idea that I wanted to go and live in London. And life in London in winter is a lot different than it is in Zimbabwe and Southern Africa. We have a really nice climate where I'm from. Cold and dark weather was really miserable. I worked at a pub in London that was called the Rat and Parrot in Leicester Square. And wow, they worked us really hard. And that was a really busy pub. I mean, I remember there were only 5 of us behind the bar, and we used to turn over £9,000 on a Friday night. It was really, really brutal. And I managed to get dismissed from my job at the pub on New Year's Eve because it was the millennium. And we had ended up with this big gap between 4 p.m. and about 10 p.m., which we were given off. And I met up with a whole bunch of people, and one thing led to another. And I was like, oh, well, I'm not going back to work. And I didn't go back to work on that night. And I was very sorry for myself after that. And that led to yet another inflection point, I think, in my life. Because after that, I went back home to Zimbabwe, having failed to make it in the big world of London, and decided that I really did actually want to go back and pursue my studies. My parents were amazing enough to continue to fund my education. And I then applied to the University of Cape Town, and that's how I ended up moving to Cape Town, South Africa. Enrolled at UCT, started a new degree, but this time I really took it seriously. I really appreciated my studies and the time that I spent there. And I really pulled out all the stuff to actually get that degree. So when I went to UCT, I had attempted to bring some of my credits across from Rhodes University, but they were reluctant to let me do that. They wanted me to rather just start over. So I started all over again, and I did a Bachelor of Social Science in Politics, Philosophy, and Economics. I really enjoyed the economics subjects. Economics is fascinating. You get to do some really cool stuff. I think my favorite course was where we did a simulation of the World Trade Organization. And our entire class was broken up into groups of 3 or 4, and we had to represent countries. And we actually had our own, and then we had to trade with each other and make declarations and simulate a WTO sitting. It was an incredible task, a lot of fun. And our lecturer for that was a chap called Don Ross, his other job was he was a drummer for Bruce Springsteen. He's a real character. And we absolutely loved him. He did such a great job. So yeah, that was one of the highlights of studying at UCT.
That is so cool. What a great class. So then what?
Yeah, and then, so just before I graduated, when I was at UCT, I started scuba diving and was lucky enough to be a member of the UCT Underwater Club, which is an incredible organization. And through that organization, I got my open water, my PADI open water, my PADI advanced, my PADI rescue, and just did a ton of diving. So I spent the whole of my second year diving, whole of my third year diving. In the middle of my third year at UCT, myself and another 2 friends started a company that actually did scuba training. I hadn't yet got my scuba instructor license, but my 2 friends had their instructor license, and I basically did all the coordination and logistics. We rented a shop in Mowbray in Cape Town and set up our own dive center, which was incredible. And the other thing we used to do on the side is run these amazing trips to Mozambique. So we had piled 40 people, I think our biggest trip, we had 51. We all piled into a bus in Rondebosch in Cape Town, and we drove all the way to Tofu in Yamban, which, just to give you an idea, the drive to Johannesburg, I believe, was 30 hours. Something crazy like that. The entire journey to get to Tofu in Yamban was 46 hours in a bus, which, and that time was spent just talking nonsense, drinking beers and playing cards, just having a great time. The incredible opportunity the UCT Underwater Club gave me is where it was one of the best clubs at UCT. So all the international students that arrived to do semester study abroad got 3 free clubs. And the highest value club was the Underwater Club. So most of the international students who studied at UCT would end up joining the Underwater Club. And through meeting them is how I got exposed to this incredible world out there of all these fascinating people who come from places like Norway, Norway, Germany, the UK, and the United States, like all over the United States. So, and then we would help out on their scuba courses, and they would all become friends. So because of studying at UCT, I got exposed to people from all over the world in all different walks of life, doing all kinds of different things. But we were all together scuba diving in Cape Town.
So this is your second business, and you're doing this while in college.
Yes. It was my second business. I was 23, I think. Yeah, pretty exciting. But I think I was lucky enough. My dad always told us, don't work for someone, work for yourself. He spent most of his life working for corporates or other organizations. It was only pretty late on in his life that he went on his own. So we came from a very supportive environment as an entrepreneur. I think it's pretty important to have your family behind you if you want to go on the entrepreneurial journey. I mean, my story carries on, but after I finished university, I moved back in with my parents. They were happy to have me, but I was also a bit surprised that, this was what had to be done. The amount of work it was running my next startup was tremendous. And it was just amazing to have people who supported you, a nice quiet place to sleep where your laundry gets done and there's food. Because like living in student accommodation, can be really raucous and it's not great. You got to do everything yourself. So the diving business carried on, but unfortunately it wasn't very profitable. So I founded it it was in the middle of my final year. So I still had to graduate from UCT. I had to do all of my studies as well as run the dive company. But in February, after I graduated, I realized that I really have to try give this a go, but I was really struggling to make ends meet. I remember being desperate the one time going around to see my parents, and I couldn't afford to pay the shop rent, which was due in a couple of weeks' time, and it was 4,000 Rand, and just really being down in the dumps because, in spite of working so hard, I wasn't really able to put petrol in the car or pay the shop rent or any of those other things. So what I did was I pivoted and I opened the IT company again. The IT company that I had started in Zimbabwe, we reimagined, and I just started it in Cape Town. And that was very, very successful. I quickly went to having 5 staff, nice new car, massive office, and we were busy, really busy. So I think I ran that IT company for another 2 or 3 years. But after the 3 years, we ended up having over 200 customers, 5 employees. And because I'd started that company myself as an individual, I had got the pricing of our services wrong. We weren't charging enough, and we had gone into the market not charging enough. And the challenge with that is it's a very painful process to tell your old customers that actually my services are now worth this much, as well as all the other new customers that your services are now worth this much. So we ended up in a bad place. We were charging too little. And I think because we became a little bit too spread, we were also doing a bad job. There are some famous stories of setting fire to CD-ROMs. And the one time we went to my dad's friend's house and our team ran a network cable diagonally across the lounge wall instead of correctly around the skirting board. I'll never forget his phone call, desperately pleading with me to come back and solve this problem before his wife got hurt because he had trusted us to do a good job. So there are a lot of lessons to be learned about running a company from that. So I ended up with that company, giving it to my staff, and they took the company off my hands, and I had many less phone calls and stress. And it was around about the same time that I'd already been speaking to my buddy Oliver, who had gone back to the US to graduate, and then he moved back to Cape Town on a permanent basis to found VACOR, which is our internship program. And that was way back in 2006. And in the background, I'd been working with some groups from universities. American University was the big one, who had come to South Africa to do a faculty-led program. So the professor came out, students came out. This particular program, they spent 5 weeks in Cape Town. And I realized that, wow, this is something really, really fun and amazing. And because of the knowledge we have of the city, because of the experiences we've had running trips to Mozambique, teaching dive courses, putting all of that together, we realized that we could help create those experiences in Cape Town for visiting professors and universities, because we had all the contacts. Also, the contacts from the computer company meant that I had a pretty good network of businesses and NGOs and places that would be interesting for universities to come and visit. So we did a pivot into what we thought was going to purely be faculty-led programs or a traveling program around South Africa. And that was when one of Oliver's professors at the University of Oregon reached out and said, hey, I've got this friend, his name's Chris Bennett. He works for IE3 Global Internships, and he's looking for placements in Cape Town for his students to do internships. And that was when we realized, wait, this is what we could also be doing. And he came out to South Africa and visited with us, and we picked about 7 different organizations to work with. And we then started hosting interns from IE3 on the West Coast. They were basically headquartered back then at the University of Oregon. So there was one organization called Connect 123 who had set up probably 10 months before us. For the longest time, we were tracking them as our primary competitors. We were breaking a lot of new ground when we were doing this. I would go to organization and say, look, we've got this student. These are qualifications they would love to come to, spend time with you, contribute to your organization, but also learn a bit about South Africa and the culture and also what you do. And it was a foreign concept back then. Now it's much more commonplace, and many, many organizations have hosted interns, but back then it was very, very, very much new ground. We had a lot of personal relationships with people who ran organizations, who were doing things, so they just trusted us. And I will agree, there were definitely some learnings that came along the way. Everything's much more structured now in terms of contracts and policy, how everything works. But we definitely learned a lot of lessons along the way.
You've moved from running a scuba business to this IT business again. Now you're pivoting and building this organization. You're bringing college students to Cape Town. You're placing them in internships. You're immersing them in the culture. I mean, this is really quite the journey. So how did you get students? How did you get universities to participate?
So we were really lucky in that South Africa hosted the 2010 World Cup, the World Cup soccer. So it became a very, very sought after destination, particularly around about 2010. It got a lot of publicity. Lots of people wanted to come out there. And we had already set up our organization by then, and we had the word out. We had a great website. Oliver's our marketing wizard, so he had done a great job of that. So we went from hosting I think in our first year we had 10 interns to suddenly hosting maybe 50 to 2010. I think we had 150 interns in that year. So the growth was pretty exponential back then and a little bit overwhelming. Because I was a study abroad student myself in Cape Town, I used to drive down from Zimbabwe. Instead of renting an individual room in a house, I would rent a house and then rent out the individual rooms at a slight profit so that my accommodation was discounted slightly. So I'd been doing that through my whole university at UCT. And then just after I graduated, my dad and I read a book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad, followed by Real Estate Riches, which is by a New Zealander called Dolph de Roos. And we got some pretty cool ideas from that about how you can buy a property, mortgage it, and then rent out the rooms to pay the mortgage. And the first house I did that with was 2003. And in 2004, I did it again as well. So basically no money down, buy the house, rent out the rooms. So we had already started building a housing portfolio, which then as time went on became very, very helpful for hosting students and interns in Cape Town. Because the quality of student accommodation in Cape Town, particularly back then, was pretty dire. The one house that I rented with my brother, the number of cockroaches in there was unbelievable. And when you call the real estate agent, they just don't want to know about it. I think in the end, it got fumigated 3 times. And there's so many roaches. You're pretty much on your own. So we wanted to create something that was nice, clean, luxurious, and just everything worked. So we did that.
What do you think led you to being such an entrepreneur, to starting all these businesses? What was that drive?
I think given the way things are in Zimbabwe, or certainly were when I was growing up, and South Africa now, you do kind of have to make your own way in the world. There are a lot of people forging their own path. I definitely feel like I know more people who are doing their own thing than people who are working for organizations out here. I think that's more the norm, but it's certainly in my position. Because one of the other challenges when I came to South Africa, because I wasn't wasn't born in South Africa. And back then, there was quite a lot of xenophobia against Zimbabweans. I think the South Africans felt like we were invading their country. Even though I'm a South African citizen, my mom's South African. Because I didn't grow up here, it takes a while to get assimilated. I definitely used to not mention my Zimbabwean roots back then. I don't mind doing it now, but back then, while we were still proving ourselves, kind of had to be quiet about your past.
Entrepreneurship has definitely been the through line in your life.
Well, this is probably South Africa. Certainly in my case, I wanted to do my own thing. I really didn't. I never wanted to have a boss. That was my thing. I just didn't want to have to be interviewed. I didn't want to have a boss. I didn't want to have to be told to do things. I wanted my freedom and independence. As you realize though, when you start a company, all your customers are your boss, and they're much tougher than a boss would ever be. So we started Vietcor in 2006. I've also done a few other amazing side hustles. Another really fun thing I did was me and a bunch of friends started a brewery because from all my trips to America, we fell in love with this idea of microbreweries. I mean, it's pretty cliche actually when I look back on it, but it was a cool thing to do in South Africa back in 2015. And we founded a brewery called Drifter Brewing Company. My friend Nick was the head brewer. And I just loved the process of starting that business because it was Nick's concept and Nick's idea, but I got involved in the procurement of the equipment, and that involved flying out to China and going to a place called Jinan. Jinan is where they forge the stainless steel which they use to make all the brewing equipment. So we got to go to China, go to Beijing, catch that high-speed train that goes between Beijing and Shanghai, hop off in Jinan and go to all these factories for the day they're hosted by Chinese locals. They're incredible. And then fly back to South Africa, and 6 months later, all the equipment arrived. We were terrified. We didn't think it would, but it all arrived. And it all arrived with this incredible guy called Wing Fen, who was Chinese, and he was the technician who came with the equipment to make sure everything worked and to put it all together for us. And the fun part of him was we were able to communicate using Google Translate. So he didn't speak any English. The poor fellow, what an adventure for him. It's all the way to Africa and then has to deal with us on Google Translate. But amazing, absolutely amazing. We got the whole thing set up. Incredible. I managed to go back to China another 2 times already. So very cool. Brewery was a casualty of COVID, but it was also a casualty of some other things as well. Maybe the mission that we had set out to in the beginning, my idea of how the place was going to end up was very different to the founder's vision. And unfortunately, that just didn't work out. During COVID in South Africa, they banned alcohol. So there were no alcohol sales in the country. So we had prohibition. That was incredible. And unfortunately, at the time, things like tourism were banned. So there's no travel. There was no group accommodation. So our accommodation business got hit very hard. And there was no alcohol allowed. So the brewery also got smashed. So we were very lucky, but we were also very clever. I remember in February 2021, I realized there was something going on. And I approached the banks. Nobody had actually done anything, but I approached our bank and asked for a gigantic overdraft, which they approved, which was wonderful. And then we had a crisis in Cape Town a couple of years before with water. I don't know if you remember, Cape Town was one of the first cities in the world to almost run out of water. And because of that, we had become very adept at just canceling things we didn't require. Because during that time, a lot of the interns, a lot of the people coming just canceled their trips. So come March, when things really were starting to look bad in South Africa, we had managed to max our overdrafts. We got the overdrafts approved prior to the banks realizing this is going to be a problem. We called all the money out, and then we canceled literally everything. Every single subscription we had. We furloughed all our staff and paid them 50%, where we basically cut a deal with them. So we managed to keep our staff unpaid all the way through COVID, which was amazing. Nobody ended up without losing their jobs or anything like that. And we then maximized every single resource the government made available to us, because they did make stuff available to us, which was incredible. And because we had all of our ducks in a row, we got the money. It was called tours, the money that they gave us, which was great. So we got 50% of our staff salary was paid for by the government, and we were able to top that up. So everyone got paid, and we went on a campaign and just sold absolutely everything that we didn't need. I remember I had 5 bicycles. I had a boat, which also got sold. I had all kinds of things that just basically everything you didn't need got sold. And we managed to scrape through until 2021. 2021 was our first reopening, but it did take a while for us to get back up to speed again. But once again, luck. I mean, Oliver had been speaking with a gap year counselor, and we pivoted to running gap years for students because there were so many college students who didn't want to start college and be virtual for their first year. So they deferred college and they came and did a gap year in Cape Town. And through that, we launched our VAC gap year program, which has been really awesome.
That is incredible. The business, the properties, the brewery, gap years, and that you managed to weather COVID and keep going.
Yeah, it's just really awesome. Absolutely saved us. We had incredible students through the system.
So what does the job look like for you in the future? What's on the horizon? Or is this it for a while?
So nothing right now. I did have a crazy side hustle. I was going to start renting little chimneys, Suzuki chimneys. I've fortunately been spoken out of doing that. It's pretty amazing having two companies to focus on. The challenge of expanding the housing company is real because we're trying to use bank money and fund it through rental returns. And the Cape Town property market is booming. So it's very difficult to buy something at a good price. So growing Rent a Room is a very slow, laborious year-by-year process. And then trying to grow back has been very interesting as well. It's drawing on skills that I don't have and I've had to develop. Going to international conferences is not a space that I thought I would find myself in, and yet that's what I've been doing. In August this year, I was on campus at the University of Illinois doing classroom visits and just things that I never thought I'd be doing, but it's fun. I've been able to travel to a lot of university campuses, but Cape Town is an incredible place. It's sometimes tough to be on the road. You're leaving all of this behind. Yeah.
Thinking about the long arc of your career, how do you see yourself in this work as you grow into it over the next chapter?
I remember being asked that question when I was 28. How am I going to age into the organization? What gives me a great deal of pleasure is working with professors like yourself who have a passion in teaching young people and have been able to do that for a career. So it may look different, but I definitely think helping people come explore a new country and just really the journey you go on when you leave what you're completely used to, go to another part of the world and see a whole bunch of people doing everything differently. You learn so much about yourself. It's just such a wonderful, confidence-inspiring experience. I highly recommend it to anyone. I mean, international travel for me is definitely, it's just been an amazing way to experience the world and realize that everyone is actually really friendly and we're all, it's just wonderful how similar people are in different parts of the world. And then we can all get along.
Yeah, we have so much more in common than we are different.
Yeah. I agree.
If you could go back and tell your younger self something or give advice to someone in their early 20s, what would it be?
Be more confident. It's going to be fine. Don't get so worked up and stressed about stuff. Maybe have a few less beers. Yeah, I would just say, just go for it. Give it a go. Try things, fail, amend your plan, and just give it a go. I mean, if you never try, you'll never know. I think my dad's been an incredible mentor. He's got a lot of business experience. He works for an organization called LMI, Leadership Management International. They do corporate coaching and personal coaching. And probably the best thing I ever did was I did a course with him called The Makings of a Champion shortly after I graduated from UCT. Graduating from university was bittersweet because, yes, it's amazing to have graduated, but I really didn't know what I was going to do next. I really, really struggled with what am I going to do next? And my dad said, well, don't just sit around, do something. And that was great advice. So I did. I started a computer company and I just lived from day to day and slowly but surely built up momentum. Once you actually start with some momentum and moving, you can then say, oh, well, this isn't working. And you pivot to the next thing and you pivot to the next thing. But it's definitely much easier to go and do something great once you've gotten going. The hardest thing in the world is to take that first step, but you don't have to see the whole stairway to take that step.
So when I was in South Africa with you, one of your coworkers told me something, and they said, you are the lighthouse. Can you explain that? Do you remember that?
Yeah, that definitely rings a bell. There's that saying, be the lighthouse, don't be in the rescue you don't be in one of the boats. And it's got something to do with, you can guide people, but don't get into their boats. And it's more about, in terms of helping people, you don't want to get too involved in the challenges that they have to solve for themselves. I think my dad had been saying like that, but I think I would like to be in that place. I mean, something that does come to mind is, there's this terrible thing about giving advice to people. I mean, I don't feel qualified to give advice to people. I can share personal experiences, but something that always does ring true is don't do for others what they should be doing for themselves. That's definitely a road you don't want to walk down. I've sometimes stood in the way of, I've done things for people that I should have actually encouraged them to do for themselves, or supported them in the journey to get to that place, because that was an important life lesson for them that I've stolen from them. And unfortunately now they're still going to have to learn that lesson. So I think that applies to when you're trying to help family members or people who are struggling with anything in their life. Be there to help them and support them, but don't step in the way of allowing them to learn those lessons and do things independently for themselves.
You've accomplished so much. So what is next for you besides work?
So the dream that I've been working towards is to buy a catamaran. My friend Nick, who was partners in the brewery, named the brewery after a steel boat called Drifter. Now, Drifter was built in 1980 by Nick's dad in his backyard. We welded this boat together. It's huge. It's huge for a sailboat in your backyard. It's 43 feet. It weighs 13 tons. And him and his mum sailed that boat from Cape Town around the world over, I believe, 9 years. We've got pictures of it in the Caribbean. It's got its Panama Canal certificate in the boat. So we've been restoring that boat since 2015 until now. And it's in great shape now. So if anyone wants to come for a sail in Cape Town, you're always welcome. But the idea is in about 10 years' time to sail a boat around the world. I would love to do that. Well, I think I would love to do that. So, that's the dream for now. A serious job exists, but there's also an alternative universe where you can go and just do something completely different. And before you commit to your world, maybe go see the rest of the world a little bit and see what's out there. Because international travel really does help to just expand your perspective and let you see some of these opportunities. And travel to Cape Town. It's a beautiful, beautiful city. The next adventure is hopefully Antarctica and building an airplane. I'm engaged in that. So.
Sean, thank you so much for sharing your story. It has been an incredible life, and I wish you all the best.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for listening to Path Found. If anything we talked about today connected with you or gave you a new perspective, we'd love it if you subscribed, left a review, or shared the episode with someone you care about. You can also find us on Instagram at Path Found Podcast. To explore more stories, resources, and ways to get involved, visit KeystoneNetwork.org. This podcast is just one part of the journey. At Keystone Network, we're helping young people and anyone figuring it out as they go build meaningful futures one step at a time. A huge thank you to my podcast editor, David Strutt. You can find him on LinkedIn for helping bring these stories to life, and to Elizabeth Miner at Silvermine Creative for the beautiful artwork and web design. And if you're on your own path, navigating the unknown, making a pivot, or simply figuring it out as you go, just know you're not alone. The route may not be linear, but there's always a way forward. I'm Monica Argandonia, and I'll see you next time on Path Found.